Here's another mixing with mic tip on using analog tape machine plugins. So in this case here, I'm going to go over to a Pro Tools session, and what I have is a Kramer tape, which is an emulation of an Ampex 351 tape machine that goes back to the Abbey Road studios, and it's part of the Abbey Road collection in the Waves bundles. Now, when you're dealing with plugins, especially vintage tape machines, first thing you want to do is read the manual about them and learn a little bit more about how the tape machine works. In this example, this original tape machine actually had tube circuitry at the beginning and output stages, at the input and output stages of the tape machine itself. So when you set the input level, you're not just controlling saturation of the tape, but you're also controlling saturation of the actual tubes in it as well. So most plugins will have some basic features like tape speed. The tape speed will determine the frequency response. So a slower tape speed like 7.5 will give you a little bit less hype on the high end, but it'll give you a fatter, richer low end frequency response. When you go to 15 or 30, your high frequency response will open up. As you go to 30 inches per second, if that's an option on your tape machine, the low end will start to roll off a little bit. And 15 inches per second is usually a nice medium where you get a nice little bump on the low end, but you also get enough on the high end. There's also a bias control, and the bias is important because it sets the saturation characteristic of the tape machine. Most tape machines in the modern tape machine era, going through the 80s and 70s, would apply overbias, and the bias is the current that actually carries the audio signal onto the tape. So the bias current essentially gets the magnetic oxide particles fluctuating back and forth between negative and positive, and then the audio signal is the residual that is left onto the tape that becomes the audio that you hear. Now, when you're setting up the plugin, it's important to understand that there's usually some form of a flux control or a tape machine alignment control. So you may see things like +3 alignment, +6 alignment, +9 alignment. And the higher the number, the more tape saturation that you get. And the amount of tape saturation, of course, would be based on the tape formula. So some tape emulation plugins also allow you to select from different tape formulations, which all have a unique sound to them. So in this case, with this particular plugin, the way I would set this up is I would set it up at the very end stage of my mix bus. In this case, what I have is a drum kit just going into a channel so we can hear this. And I also have bus processing, but I'm going to put it after the bus processing, because technically what would happen is if you were printing your mix, it would be coming out of the console, so that would be post bus processing and then being recorded as a mix onto the tape machine. And that's the way that I'm going to set it up here. You can also apply the plugin, if you have the CPU power to handle it, across the first insert of all these of your session. And if you can handle all the CPU power, then that would be the equivalent of playing back your song from an analog tape, right? So you'd be going right from the regions or hard drive, technically, through the analog processing for the plugins, and then you could go about the process of applying your equalization and all of that. I have some misgivings about that, but maybe that's a whole other tip. What we want to do first is we want to set our input levels, right? And this is going to determine the amount of, in this case, the amount of saturation on the actual tubes. Right, so I'm going to drive it a little bit more. Now, the thing about VU meters is they don't really show you the peak value of what's going on, right? So you're not going to get this, and you'll only see a peak if there's a light lighting up over here. But let's say that we like that and we put on the analog tape. The next thing we would want to do is select between our different tape speeds. So you can really hear the difference in the high end, particularly with the hi-hat. Right, so let's go with that, and then we can also go with the different bias characteristics. The overbias is going to create a warmer, richer kind of sound, where the nominal bias, which is sort of an even leveled bias, it's not saturating the tape, will actually give a little bit more rich high end. So you really hear the openness of the drum kit and the warmth of the overbias. The next is the flux circuitry, and this is where we get into the different forms of tape machine alignment. This is actually an internal adjustment and it's part of the tape machine alignment. So the level meter will not change, but you're applying more saturation to the tape internally. The idea is that your input level is setting what the VU meter is showing you, and the flux is determining based off of that level how much you're saturating the tape. And this is confusing, but essentially the reason for doing this is that if you just hit the tape harder, the meter only goes up to +3. So what happens is you don't know how much higher than +3 your level is. So by setting the input level here with the flux control internally to the tape machine so that it hits the tape itself harder, you can meter 0 VU but still be saturating the same way as if the input meter was showing +3. And that's the basic idea. This way you can actually meter what's going on. So think of it as two level adjustments. One that sets the input level that you see here on the meter. The other that determines how much based on that input level the tape is being saturated. So if you watch the input level meter, as I adjust the flux level, you'll hear the distortion characteristic being added in, but you won't see any more input level. Right? So here, this is a 0 alignment. That's a +3. A +6, +9, +12, and I'm not sure what this is, maybe +15. So you can really hear the distortion characteristic being added in there, but the level doesn't change. So this is how hard you're actually hitting the tape itself. So what we want to do is, if we set it here, we can create a more open sound, or a richer, warmer, thicker sound. And we can make some adjustments accordingly. The basic idea here is that we are setting the input level so that we see it well, and in this case it's also saturating the tubes because of this particular tape machine model, and another one that employs the flux control. So this control may show up as a +3, +6, +9. This particular one allows you to go any variation in between, and then you can select the different tape types. So understanding a little bit about tape machines is helpful when using vintage plugins. Some also have the ability to add in tape hiss, which you can actually hear. Yes, that is tape hiss. And then you also have wow and flutter, which is the mechanical variation of the speed of the tape as it's being pulled through the machine mechanism, which you can shut off. Usually leaving a little bit of that in will give it a little bit more of a natural variant characteristic. It's almost like a little bit of a modulation that is uneven, but it's so minute and small it just creates the subtle effect of having some space. So let's listen to this bypassed. So what you'll hear is the richness and the openness coming out. Okay, and there you have it. There are the basics for working with an analog tape machine and using analog tape machine plugins. You can learn this and many other tips by joining into the live Mixing with Mike classes. They happen every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. You can join in for free if you go to mpginsider.com and sign up for the newsletter at the bottom of the front page, and then you will receive notices for how to attend the free live classes every Wednesday at 7 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time.